So why the alt-right versus Christianity? Well, there's a few reasons. First, I'd like to say that this subject has been fairly difficult to tackle because of the breadth of not only alt-right beliefs, but because of the breadth of Christianity. What you are hearing is the fifth or so script I've rewritten because they were all written and then rewritten several times. My goal here is to ensure that you, whoever you are and whatever you believe, understands that biblical Christianity does not support alt-right ideology. This is true whether you're a Christian, an atheist, an agnostic, or something in the middle. Most of my videos are just my perspective as a Christian, and this one is going to have a little bit more religious content than most of my others, so hang in there. My goal is to keep it sane and cringe-free because the important message is about the alt-right and their flawed attempts to identify with Christianity. This is a discussion, not a proselytization. I'm going to put down some Bible verses on the side here to let you do your own research and to avoid bogging down the discussion. Vox Day once called Christianity one of the pillars of the alt-right in a 16-point list that he showed to Richard Spencer, who largely, if not completely, agreed with the list, according to Vox. Spencer, though an atheist, calls himself a cultural Christian. The traditional or trad life movement in the alt-right often links itself to Christianity or Christian morals, and a couple of alt-right bloggers or alt-writers have blogs about Christianity and how it fits with the alt-right. So on multiple levels, it seems that a decent chunk of the alt-right sees a connection between their movement and Christianity. So first, let's identify the two sides. For purposes of clarity, I am defining the alt-right as ethno-nationalists, those that see America as a sanctuary for white Western culture and values and a place to preserve a white future for them and their children, and a place of white homogeneity as far as ethnicity is concerned. This is what alt-right thought leaders have used to define the movement. To be fair, the alt-right is not 100% on the same page about Christianity. Some, like Richard Spencer, see themselves as culturally Christian, even though they're atheist or irreligious. My suspicion here is that even though Christianity is objectionable to Richard Spencer's atheism, the political expediency he gains is worth it in his mind. Others simply don't like Christianity or religion at all in the alt-right, and they are antagonistic to modern Christianity, maybe because it didn't preserve white culture like they thought it should, that the modern church let white people down. And still others, like tradlifers, see the alt-right as a political manifestation of their Christian values, that it's just one single faith-based system that they're living under, and that it's a valued system that society should be compelled to accept. Now to define Christianity simply. Boy, that's a task. Finally, my Bible college degree is paying off. Yes! Yes! Christianity is the belief in redemption. Redemption is the central word of Christianity. If you only think of one word in regards to Christianity, think of the word redemption. It's that God wants to save humanity from itself by way of the Messiah, who, as you probably guessed, is Jesus. In the Christian belief, we see the human race as equally broken and equally needing help. So this need and the salvation that God wants to accomplish are not based on any biological factors, and that's the central and most important part of the Christian belief system. Now, this belief comes from the Bible as the founding document of Christianity, especially the second part of the Bible called the New Testament. I find it useful to define Christianity by the most original and simple definition possible, as the writers of the New Testament originally defined it. This is because these writings in the New Testament are essentially what created Christianity in a logical and practical sense. It's the codification of belief. This is the same standard we can apply to Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Mormonism, Islam, and so on. I have given this same courtesy even to the alt-right. Jared Taylor, Richard Spencer, etc. are founding thought leaders of the alt-right, so I don't accept one random modern preacher's opinion about what Christianity is any more than I accept some random guy on the internet trying to tell me that the alt-right is completely different from how Richard Spencer defined it. So biblical Christianity is just that. It's based on the Bible, and anything else might be cultural or traditional, but by definition cannot be biblical. One of the foremost writers of the New Testament and Christian doctrine was a Jewish rabbi named Paul. He was highly educated in Judaism by some elite teachers and originally someone who hunted and killed Christians before his conversion to Christianity. Talk about a red pill moment. Without him, we don't have Christian doctrine or Christianity as it exists today. Paul is not the only founding father of the church or Christianity, but he wrote about 2/3 of the New Testament, which means he's a pretty big deal from any angle within Christianity. Much of what I will be referencing will be from Paul's writings to the early church. So let's look at race, ethnicity, and culture, the things that the alt-right say are important, and let's look at them through the lens of the New Testament and biblical Christianity. The New Testament very much contests the idea that ethnicity and race matter to God, or should matter to Christians. For starters, Paul wrote that Christians should not pay attention to weird doctrines or to pay attention to endless genealogies. This is actually reiterated in another place in the New Testament. So Paul says this not once, but twice. Don't pay attention to endless genealogies. The only point to taking a genealogy seriously is to prove one's racial purity, legitimacy, or authority. Now, a lot of us do genealogy stuff for fun, to see our family history, to find our old castles and coats of arms and stuff like that. That's fine. The point is that Christians aren't to pay attention to genealogies for any of the reasons that people take them seriously, which has to do with racial purity and the authority or legitimacy one derives from such supposed purity. This idea of racial or ethnic purity is something Paul wrote about in another section where he makes a rhetorical argument against some detractors of his. He says essentially that his detractors are coming against him based on his cultural purity, his legitimacy under Jewish law, and his ethnic purity, but he refutes them by showing that his pedigree is actually higher than theirs. He puts the whole issue to rest, saying that in the Christian faith, his pedigree means nothing. He's essentially saying, according to their racial, cultural, and religious standards that they're so hyped about, I'm actually better than them. And from that position, I'm telling you that it means nothing in light of redemption. Again, going back to redemption as a central concept here. But the argument about the unimportance of race in the New Testament is actually fleshed out even further in a couple other places. Basically, the line that Paul delivers on several occasions to several different churches is that there is neither Jew nor Greek in Christianity. Allow me to explain. This is because Jews were likely to be thought of as first-class Christians or possessing first-class spirituality, and the Greeks or the Gentiles, not so much. That's why Paul says race doesn't create value. This is not a denial of the obvious physical reality that races exist or have certain traits, but rather an assertion that this reality doesn't create status with God. In other words, under redemption, in God's spiritual economy of value, there's no such thing as race. There's only humans. No black victimization, no white privilege, none of that social justice garbage, nothing but a true level playing field. Because of this idea of equality, sameness, and non-differentiation, the idea of segregation or separation of the races is something that Paul actually hammers pretty intensely. At one point, one of the church leaders, a disciple named Peter, the Catholics think he was the first pope or something, well, this guy used to eat with Greek Christians all the time as a church leader, but when some Jews came to check up on him, he kind of found his way back to the cool kids table and segregated himself. Paul visited him or saw him when he did this, and he openly, publicly, and intensely blasted him for doing this. In front of everyone, in front of the whole church. The point is that in the Bible, segregation isn't okay for Christians. We see this from the man himself, Jesus. At one point, Jesus traveled to the Samaritan region to reach out to the people there. Why is that a big deal? Well, the Samaritans and the Jews at the time deeply hated each other. They despised each other and each segregated into their own geographic area. But Jesus, as a Jew, made it a point to travel there, probably on foot, which took a while, and he spent time with them. Moreover, when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, he makes a Samaritan the hero, rescuing a Jew who's been beat up and robbed. Now, the point of this story was that someone had asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And so Jesus responds with this story to illustrate a point. Everyone is your neighbor, even the Samaritans, even the racial other, even the outcasts, even the persona non gratas are your neighbor. So, summarizing so far, Christians aren't to worry about racial genealogies in a serious way to establish their purity or legitimacy, because their racial purity doesn't matter. Race isn't important in Christianity, and segregation is reviled as well, because the people around us are really our neighbors. Are we sensing any points of conflict with alt-right ideology yet? Well, let's move on to culture. Allow me to pose a question. If you believed in God as a potential judge who could determine your eternal destiny, then is there any higher goal in life than making that judge happy with you? Obviously, the answer is no. Keeping God happy is pretty much the chief goal if you believe that. That's a pretty standard theist belief, right? In the early church, there were some people that went around saying that Christians had to be Jewish in their lifestyle to keep God happy. Keeping Jewish laws and living like a Jew is and was a cultural conversion for these early Christians, especially the Gentile ones. The Bible's response to this assertion that people have to culturally convert to keep God happy is pretty simple. No, they don't. Paul's writings in the Bible make it abundantly clear that Christians don't have to do Jewish cultural things to make God happy, and there's no command for Jewish Christians to embrace Gentile culture either. So if you don't have to culturally convert for the most important reason in Christianity, for redemption, there's no biblical reason you'd change your entire life and culturally convert for something less important either. In fact, in the early church, there was quite a cultural mix going on, which the 14th chapter of Romans alludes to. The church at Rome was a mix of Jews and Gentiles. So this little issue kept popping up, and it had to do with shopping and meat. oddly enough. See, the Gentile Christians would buy bargains at the market, which included non-kosher meats, so to speak. And the Jewish Christians, they just couldn't bring themselves to do it. They'd been raised their whole lives just to shop and to eat kosher. So this mixed group of Christians were really divided and fighting over this pretty hardcore. So the command was given to them, don't hate on people that live differently than you, especially on matters of mere conscience. And if you recall one of my last points, don't segregate over these differences either. The church was multicultural and commanded to be tolerant of one another, not to change their culture to be exactly alike. The reason for this is that the citizenship of a Christian is said to be in heaven, not on earth. That citizenship is regardless of gender, ethnicity, fashion, culture, tastes in food, or what have you. In other words, our common citizenship in heaven is greater than our ethnic or cultural differences. I would, however, as myself make this statement: I am a civic nationalist. I believe that if you want to live in another country, you can and should assimilate as a sign of respect to those that live there, and as a sign that you really respect the culture you want to be a part of. To me, this makes sense, and I see no biblical mandate against cultural respect and assimilation as long as the culture doesn't demand that you turn into a murderer or something. So ISIS culture, definitely out. Now, before the alties pounce, I hold that people can change. They can do what they want. They have free will. Ben Carson, as a black, is American. In fact, he's more American than many of the mixed-race thought leaders on the alt-right. Finally, there are 3 issues of general compatibility that I'd like to raise between the alt-right and Christianity. The first is this: every book of the New Testament, save for 2, was written by the Jews. Paul, as a Jew, deeply educated in Judaism, wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. And those writings are the doctrinal foundation for Christianity. For a paranoid alt-right that loves the JQ, this begs the question of if Christianity is not some Jewish conspiracy to enslave Greco-Roman peoples to a Jewish morality, a conspiracy that is now enslaving the West. There's a reason the words Judeo-Christian are together and hyphenated. Christianity is deeply and inextricably rooted in the Jewish people. In fact, Jesus himself was a Jew, and this raises a second issue. At the time, the Jewish people in the state of Israel were a puppet state under Roman authority, and it was an oppressive authority. This was not a great time to be a Jew or to live in Israel as a Jew. There was actually a large Jewish ethno-nationalist movement bent on expelling the Romans and setting up Israel as a sovereign nation, an ethno-state. Historically, we know this movement to be the Zealots. At one point, the Jewish people, oppressed and tired, became bent on making Jesus the king of their ethno-state to lead them to victory and to drive the Romans out. He had the people, he had the power and the influence to make a very good attempt at doing this, at least from a human perspective. But Jesus refused to let them make him a king of their ethno-state, and he left Israel as an oppressed Roman puppet. This would make Jesus the worst, most unforgivable kind of leader, according to the alt-right ideology. Why would anyone on the alt-right want to identify themselves as a follower of this Jesus, a Jesus that the alt-right would say is a race traitor? Third, and finally, in light of all the evidence I've presented, it becomes apparent that what the Bible calls important and what the alt-right calls important are 2 very different belief systems. As I've found myself explaining many times, the alt-right's central focus is race. The white race, being white, staying white, making more whites, and doing so in a white country. It's their primary focus. It's their number 1 most important issue because they claim it's existential. Ethnocentrism and ethno-nationalism are the most important issue in their lives, from the sounds of it. Everything they talk about is based on it, circles around it, is tied to it, and even if their beliefs differ, the foundation is the same: whiteness. They tweet about it, stream about it, study it, write about it, talk about it, stream about it some more, and everything is about race. If a guy has a Corvette and his entire life is about that car, perhaps even to the point of detriment, wouldn't it be fair to say, yeah, well, he worships that thing? That's my supposition here. Forgive the Christianese, but the alt-right worships whiteness, race realism, however you want to put it. Jesus cannot be a Messiah in the alt-right belief because their Messiah is the ideology and political system that preserves their race. That's their idol, a big white idol that some of them have tried to chain a Bible to. The truth is this: at no point are Christians or the church directly commanded to preserve ethnic lines or any sort of racial purity. At no point are Christians commanded to value a racially centric system or to value or advance the things that the alt-right says are important. If the alt-right is seemingly a big fan of Christianity, then they are enthusiastic not about the original text, the form, or the practice of Christianity, but they are instead practicing a white polyester polo shirt Christianity for a white God that they made in their own image. The Bible that defines Christianity in its oldest and purest form does not support the alt-right's version of Christianity. Alt-right quasi-spirituality has nothing to do with this biblical Christianity. It has everything to do with a heavily politicized, racially motivated, far-right nationalist churchianity culture. It has everything to do with a regressive form of ethnocentrism that is not and cannot be supported from the Bible, the New Testament, the writings of Paul, or any other biblical writer. My hope is this, that those of you who are atheists, agnostic on the left, on the right, and the center, I want you to recognize that there are elements of the alt-right that use Christianity as a marketing ploy or a spiritual front for some very unchristian ideas, for some very unbiblical ideas. The alt-right's pillar of Christianity that Vox Day wrote about is a made-up Christianity for the political purposes of the alt-right. They created white nationalist churchianity in their own image. Christians should easily recognize that this is a new gospel that has nothing in common with the original. And now, so should you.